Got your eye on the Sonos Era speakers but not sure which way to go? Let's consider your options and help you make the right choice. Since the launch of the Era 100 and the Era 300, we've had so many questions from you guys trying to work out which to add to your home. One of the most common questions has been, should you go for a pair of Era 100s or a single Era 300? With only £50 in it, we've got some key pros and cons which should help you decide which is the best option for your space. Now, there is a simple answer. For regular music, a stereo pair of Era 100s will offer a louder and wider performance with better bass than a single Era 300. But as the Era 300 is a Dolby Atmos speaker with drivers that fire to the front, sides, and upwards, you will get a completely different listening experience with Atmos tracks than you can experience with regular tracks on the Era 100s. So if you're not interested in Atmos, maybe go for two Era 100s. But if you're tempted or think it will be something you want to experience further down the line as it becomes more mainstream, then maybe the Era 300 is for you. Now, that's obviously a very condensed verdict, but if that's all you needed, then you're welcome. But there is a lot more to this decision, and probably why a lot of you guys have been in touch. So if you're still torn, then let's dive a little bit deeper. Oh, and little heads up, I'm not going to compare these as rears in a Sonos home cinema setup because that's a whole nother video. So internally, we actually have the same number of amplifiers in both of these setups. We've got 6 Class D amps in the Era 300 and 3 each in the Era 100s. We have 2 tweeters and 1 woofer in each of the 100s, while the 300 offers 1 front-facing tweeter, 1 upwards firing tweeter, 2 sideways firing tweeters, and 2 sideways firing woofers, so we've got the same number of woofers and tweeters across the board. But spec isn't everything, and the 300 is designed very differently to the more traditional makeup of the 100s. Plus, Sonos keep their cards close to their chest when it comes to speaker sizes, so we're going to have a look further than the spec for this comparison. First things first, one of the main differentiators of these two setups is the practicality of one speaker versus two. The Era 100s are very versatile speakers which can be placed on a unit, on stands, or in a bookshelf, but as you are setting up as a stereo pair, you want to place them around 8 feet apart, with the best listening position for you being around 8 to 12 feet from them. Now, that's not going to be practical for every space, and actually we've got them a bit closer than that in our lounge setup, and that works fine for us. In comparison, the Era 300 is a bit more straightforward to place in your space, as you've only got to worry about one speaker. The only exception to that is that you've got to be careful not to block the side and upward speakers, so you wouldn't want to put one of these in a bookshelf, as you need to leave around 2 foot of clearance above and around 8 inches on the sides. I think when comparing different speaker options, people can forget about the aesthetics and practicality of different options, but in reality that can have a huge impact on your choice. For me, I like the design of the Era 300, but I know it's a bit like Marmite, and some of you may prefer the look of 2 Era 100s in your space. Another deciding factor is whether you'll be using these speakers for an external audio source, as both have a USB-C line import. You will need one of the Sonos dongles, but you can connect a turntable up and then have the option to send the audio to any other Sonos speakers in your home. One big pro for the 2 Era 100 setup is you can make the most of both of the line imports. So you could have a turntable connected to one speaker and a CD player on the other. Beyond that, both offer voice control with Alexa or Sonos Voice, and both have the newer version of TruePlay Tuning, which gives you 2 options. One which uses the mics in the speaker to optimize performance for your space, and the other which uses the traditional TruePlay method using an iOS device and walking around your space. Oh, and they both have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.0 connectivity options too. So, the main deciding factor is of course going to be sound performance. We've tested these out in a few different spaces and with a lot of different music from different sources and have some interesting results to share. If we start with the Era 100s, for anyone familiar with the sound of their predecessor, the Sonos One Gen 2, these offer noticeably more bass with a 25% larger mid-woofer. The overall performance is plenty loud enough to fill a medium or large space, and they give a wide soundstage which goes far beyond the speakers. I'd say the stereo imaging is very impressive, vocals are good, and I'd say these performed well across a wide range of genres. You could add a sub-mini or even a sub-Gen 3 down the line for extra bass, but I think the bass output from 2 speakers will be more than enough to satisfy most listeners. Overall, when compared with the single Era 300 for regular music, the hundreds gave a more room-filling sound with more powerful bass. The Era 300 I felt gave a different listening experience. As you're listening to a single speaker, even with the sound projected from the sides, front and top, it's still a more narrow soundstage. I think the bass from the 300 is good. It's not as good as the pair of 100s and it's not rumbling your chest bass, but it's balanced and tight. And actually in most tracks we listened to, I preferred the vocals on the 300. I think they were slightly cleaner and there was better separation. Now this is where things get interesting, as we noticed a big difference was going from listening to regular music on the Era 100s and then listening to that same track in Dolby Atmos on the 300. You hear more elements of the track and I'd say it's a more involved listening experience. Last Last by Burna Boy still felt wider on the 100s, but the overall experience was more gripping on the 300s, and actually going from Atmos to non-Atmos on the 300 alone, the performance definitely stepped up massively. It almost feels like the 300 comes alive with Atmos tracks, which I guess is the whole point. To confirm this, we carried out multiple flicking back and forth with the same track in Atmos and non-Atmos on the Era 300, and the difference in performance was surprising. It offers a great experience for regular tracks, but if you can listen to Atmos music on it, you're getting so much more out of the speaker. Fleetwood Mac Dreams was another great track for testing. The initial percussion when the hi-hat comes in sounds so much more realistic in Atmos on the 300. You can hear every detail, the drums are more present, and the vocals are so much more projected into the room. It feels like there's nothing between you and the artist, whereas with the hundreds, while the vocals are good, they were sat back into the track, taking some of the realism out of the performance. Now I'm not going to dive too deep into the spatial audio conversation in this video, as we've talked about it quite a bit in previous videos, but I do think you need to consider whether it's something you want to experience when you're making the choice between these two setups. If you've got Apple Music or Amazon Music spatial audio, then you're going to get more enjoyment from the Era 300, where you've got the option to make the most from Atmos music right now. I'm an Apple Music listener, and while I think the Era 100s are a more impressive setup for regular music, my choice out of these options would be the Era 300. So I've got the option of experiencing my tracks in Atmos when I can, plus I'm hoping one day I'll be able to add a second Era 300, as we've tested that stereo pair and it's a fantastic setup. Any fans of the channel will know Louis is a Spotify user, so he's a lot more torn when it comes to this comparison. And for anyone in the same boat, I can see the 100s being more tempting right now. We are expecting more support for spatial audio to come and for more and more Atmos content to become more available. So I guess it depends on whether you want to be there and ready for it or whether you don't see yourself making the most of it. A good question to ask yourself is, how involved are you going to be in the listening experience? Will you be regularly sitting down for a listening session, or are you more of a casual listener? Era 300 I would say is more for those involved listeners, while Era 100s are maybe better suited to more casual listening. Of course, the flexibility of Sonos means you can change how you use these speakers in the future, whether it's adding a subwoofer, adding a second Era 300, or using your Era speakers as rears to a Sonos soundbar. So, tough decision, but hopefully we've helped share some of the different reasons to opt for either an Era 300 or two Era 100s. Either way, both setups are great options for adding to your Sonos ecosystem, and both offer a really enjoyable experience for listening to your music. If we've helped you make your choice a little bit easier, let me know in the comments and share which option you're going for. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.